As we start in 1974, the Grateful Dead have been together now for 9 years, and they've recorded a ton of albums, both studio and live. And they're really working on honing down their live set to make it even more exciting, which we'll see as we look at this episode. So you ready to go to Terrapin Station or Shakedown Street? Doesn't matter. Let's drop the needle. In 1973, the Acid King, Owsley Stanley, their sound man for the Grateful Dead, had decided that their sound system that they were playing with live was not good. And he was going to design and build the ultimate sound system for any band anywhere in the world. But it would be for the Grateful Dead to take on tour and perform with. Now, he did do that, but it took him over a year to design this monumental undertaking. And it was called the Wall of Sound. It was very huge and very sophisticated. It contained 6 independent sound systems using 11 separate channels. Vocals, lead guitar, rhythm guitar, and piano each had their own channel and their own set of speakers. And for Phil Lesh's bass, the signals from each string of the guitar were sent to 4 separate channels and separate speakers. And the drums had 3 channels just to themselves. Basically, there was 604 total speakers powered by 89 300-watt solid state and 3 350-watt vacuum tube amplifiers. And it generated 26,400 watts of power. The sound projected from the system could be heard over a quarter of a mile away with absolutely no distortion. And the musicians on stage were able to mix their own output. So there was no sound man out in the audience running the soundboard. The musicians were in charge of mixing it themselves. And it gave them a monitoring system that they had not been used to before, so they could hear very clearly what they were playing and what they were singing. And for the audience, this was truly an amazing spectacle. At least 2 versions of the Wall of Sound existed because it took so long to set up and tear down that immense system that when they were setting one up, the second one would be going to the next venue and they would start setting it up so it would be ready when the Dead would get over there. The Wall of Sound weighed 75 tons and it required 21 crew members to set up and dismantle it, and 4 semi-trailers just to move it. Even though it was sonically and technically impressive, as you can imagine, this was a monumental thing to take on the road and extremely expensive. So as a result, they only used the Wall of Sound for 8 months in 1974, and then it was retired. In 1974, the Dead wanted to release an album called Ugly Rumors, but when it's released, it's called From the Mars Hotel. But if you have this record and you turn it upside down, the cover upside down, and look at it in a mirror, you can see the text, Ugly Rumors. And now, according to Wikipedia, Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of England, when he was in college at Oxford, was so taken with this album that he actually formed a band that was called Ugly Rumors. The Mars Hotel is actually a derelict hotel in San Francisco, and it was where Jack Kerouac stayed. And it's also where David Bowie shot his Jean Genie video. On the tracks, I like U.S. Blues, China Doll, Scarlet Begonias, and then there's the forgettable Money Money. The album hits number 16 in the charts. The band then took a break from touring, probably trying to recoup some of the costs that they had from moving that Wall of Sound around. And they camped out at a home studio that Bob Weir had built in his house up in Mill Valley. And it was there that they decided to make an album which had some weird Eastern influences and some wild time changes. And that album is called Blues for Allah. Departed drummer Mickey Hart came back and sat in on some of the sessions and decided to rejoin the band after the release of the album. This is a strange album, even for the Grateful Dead. There are 5 instrumentals on the album. Good songs are Help on the Way, Franklin's Tower, the instrumental King Solomon's Marbles, The Music Never Stopped, Blues for Allah, and Unusual Occurrences in the Desert. Critical reaction was quite mixed, but the album did manage to reach number 12 in the charts. Back in 1973, the band contracted with United Artists to create a movie. It's going to be called The Grateful Dead Movie, and the idea was to use concert footage from live concerts and them in the studio and, come out with this great movie. But Jerry Garcia took it on himself to edit the movie, and that took an incredibly long time, over 3 years. Now, United Artists was spending a lot of money on this movie and not seeing anything come back, so it was decided that they wanted a soundtrack album that they could release prior to the movie. The problem was Garcia wasn't finished editing the movie, so he couldn't be bothered dealing with the soundtrack. So it fell to Phil Lesh and Stanley to put together a soundtrack album. The album is called Steal Your Face. It's a double album and was created from concerts that utilized the wall of sound system. The album was released on the new quadraphonic technology, meaning 4 separate playback channels, but the quad mix is not good. It's muddy. Most of the songs are short, and they tend to reflect Phil Lesh's taste rather than presenting an authentic representation of the Dead on stage. As it turns out, only 2 songs were used when the movie came out, U.S. Blues and Casey Jones. And with the muddy sound mix on the album, it did not sell well. The album would be the last album to be released on Grateful Dead Records. The band then decides to sign with Arista. In 1977, the Grateful Dead movie is finally released. It was filmed over 5 nights at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. The movie is directed by Jerry Garcia. Jerry Garcia had wanted to stop touring and take a break, so these 5 concerts were set to be a farewell run. Mickey Hart joins the band on stage for the first time in over 3 years. If you watch this movie, you can actually see how the wall of sound helped the Dead play live. When the film was released, it was not released traditionally. It didn't go to a distributor. Rather, the Dead arranged for it to go city by city to select theaters, and they installed a special sound system in each theater. The film has been re-released on numerous home video formats, including Blu-ray, and I'm sure you can probably find it streaming as well. In 1977, the Dead released their first album for Arista, which is called Terrapin Station. Now, this album has got an interesting backstory to it. Clive Davis, of course, was the head of the label, and he was desperate for the Dead to have a huge success with this album. So he decided in recording it that he would bring in an outside producer. So he hired Keith Olsen to produce it. Now, Keith had just worked on the Fleetwood Mac album and was used to Lindsey Buckingham's perfection in recording. So he decided this is the way he would work with the Dead. And so he had the Dead in the studio doing take after take after take of the same song. Now, obviously, this is not the way the Grateful Dead functions. Olsen decided to bring in strings and horns to augment the sound, and at one point he actually erases Mickey Hart's parts from a song. Now, Mickey, of course, is incensed about this, as is Jerry Garcia, and they go back in the studio and re-record those parts again. Jerry Garcia hated this album and said it was basically Olsen trying to put the Grateful Dead in a dress. 2 singles were released from the album, Dancing in the Streets and Passenger. And although the members of the Dead all hated this album, it still managed to reach 28 in the charts. In September of 1978, the Grateful Dead Takes a long, strange trip even for them. They decide that they're going to go to the Giza pyramids in Egypt and record for 3 nights, the last night being during a total lunar eclipse. And they do. What a major undertaking this must have been. But unfortunately, there were a lot of technical problems and sound problems in the recording, and so that performance was not ever released until 30 years later. So the Dead goes back into the studio and decides to release an album which is called Shakedown Street. And Deadheads hate this record. They say that it's basically the Dead doing disco. I do kind of like their cover of Good Lovin', Fire on the Mountain, Stagger Lee, and If I Had the World to Give. The album was not a bestseller, reaching 41 on the charts, making it the first Dead album not to be in the 40s since that album, which was named after the palindrome all those years before. After the release of this album, Keith and Donna Jean Godchik decide they're leaving the Grateful Dead due to creative differences. Now, as usual, I've created a Spotify playlist where you can listen to some of the songs that I've talked about in this episode. And here's the link, and I'll also put it in the comments below. And so this period ends with 2 members of the Dead leaving, and the Dead having to decide how they're going to keep on going. But you know what? They will survive, as we'll discover in the next episode. Thanks for watching, and keep a rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.